Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more extra credits, this time back with their extra history series on the Irish potato famine. This time, episode 2, The Corn Laws. Before we dive in, though, make sure you go and check out the links in the description box below. I would love it if you joined the Discord and followed me over at Twitch. Okay, let's just go ahead and get this party started.
London, September 12th, 1845. The press operator runs off issues of the Gardener's Chronicle. Over 6,000 copies, fresh and ready for tomorrow. The editor bursts in, waving a piece of paper. They must stop the presses and insert a front page notice.
Yes.
No, it can't wait until next week. The potato blight has reached Ireland, the notice reads. Crops around Dublin are perishing. It ends with a question. Where will Ireland be in the event of a universal potato rot? But everyone knows where it will be. In the embrace of hunger.
Bum, 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 bum.
2 months later, the Gardener's Chronicle was
The weekly post-date. Oh. Recant, scant, plant, rant. Blight with bite might be in sight.
in the minority when it predicted agricultural disaster. Over the past 2 months, the press sent mixed signals. Some said the potato crop was fine. Others that the blight only affected a few counties. So to get a sense of the problem, Prime Minister Robert Peel sent a scientific commission to get solid numbers. Wait, pause the history for just a second. The Prime Minister's name during the potato famine was Peel. No one else thinks that's a little funny? No, I know it's a serious story. Come on, stop looking at me like, fine, you know what, it's fine. I'm sorry.
I know, it seems very conspiratorial, doesn't it? Doesn't it, my man? The English. New conspiracy theory unlocked.
I'm sorry. His name's Peel, though. Now, that commission was in the House of Commons, telling Parliament to expect 80% mortality in the potato crop. They'd devised methods for keeping the blight away from harvested potatoes, but these proved ineffective. The news troubled Peel. In the summer, there had been hints of crop loss, but
I can't remember if they discussed this or if I mentioned it in the first episode, but another thing and why the potato famine really affected Ireland so much, and not just because, they really only grew potato. If I'm remembering correctly, it's one of the issues with modern farming and modern agriculture that is a very real possibility, is that the way we grow food now, because we have so many people and because we have streamlined the process so much, is that the potatoes in Ireland, I believe, were pretty much just one type of potato, which is why this bacteria or whatever was able to spread so far, because the genes of the potatoes throughout Ireland was the same, like, potato family or whatever. And like, we do that with bananas. Our bananas are pretty much the same banana family. We don't have much variety in our bananas, even though I think there are over 200 types of bananas. I think we only grow really in mass like a few of the banana families or whatever the fuck. Those are numbers I heard online like a couple of years ago. So I don't know if they're entirely accurate, but like, yeah, we don't grow variety. We breed certain foods for the best, like, most nutrients and the best growing or whatever the fuck. They're the easiest to grow so that we can grow them in mass numbers. But the problem with that is that if a disease comes in that affects the crops, it will affect every single crop of that type of that family within the area very quickly, as we see here with the potatoes.
that was nothing new. Irish potatoes were unreliable. There'd been 16 potato failures since 1800. And when crops failed, tenants couldn't pay their rent. When tenants didn't pay, landlords brought police and troops to throw them off their land. That meant riots and retaliatory livestock killings. It would also mean secret societies like the Molly Maguires and White Boys ambushing landlords and middlemen in their carriages.
I see nothing wrong with this. Eat the rich. Do it. I see no problem.
And those previous potato losses were
I
only
don't.
regional. This was the
I'm not gonna feel bad for the rich and the landlords that kick people, starving people out of homes.
whole island. Instability worried
Right? Like it's not their fault that the crops went bad. Fuck landlords.
Peel. A few years before, the Irish Member of Parliament, Daniel O'Connell, who had campaigned successfully against anti-Catholic laws, had set his sights on repealing the Act of Union. O'Connell's outdoor meetings had attracted 500,000 people, and the government had to threaten force to disperse them. Since then, Peel had taken a more conciliatory approach, but famine could upend everything. And the reports were bad. Now that it was November and the full harvests were coming in, the scope of the problem was becoming clear. Not even harvested potatoes were safe. In Western Ireland, a poor farmer had buried his harvested potatoes in a pit, muttering a prayer at how lucky he'd been. No blight. But a few days later, he opened the pit to check them. Half were totally rotten. Panic struck the whole west of Ireland, where the climate was too wet for grain or oats. I cannot describe in language strong enough, read one account, the frightful and awful alarm of the poor people. May God, in his bountiful mercy, avert such a disastrous calamity. Peel had his faults, but inaction was not one of them.
I could say
The
things,
son
but I'm
of
gonna
a textile
refrain.
industrialist, he was the first prime minister to come from business rather than the aristocracy. He'd risen through the civil service with sheer hard work and a few big gambles. And he was about to gamble again. Ireland would need food, but Peel would have to walk a fine line. He was a Tory, and his Conservative Party were hardcore trade protectionists, particularly due to support from grain merchants. Whatever he did, it couldn't undercut or upset the grain market. And then there was the opposition, the liberal Whigs. They were similarly hardcore when it came to free trade economics. They hated any government intervention in the market. So in other words, the Tories wouldn't support bringing in foreign grain because it would cut local merchants' profits, and the Whigs would shoot down any intervention on price. Meanwhile, Daniel O'Connell and a Dublin group proposed their own measures. Forbid turning grain into whiskey, bring in foreign grains, institute public works, and stop exporting Irish grain, beef, and oats to England. Neither party, Peel knew, would stand for that. After all, grain imports were already a sensitive split, as the two parties consistently brawled over the Corn Laws, a series of protectionist measures meant to keep cheap American grain out of the UK. Oh, by the way, in Britain, corn means grain. Got it? Cool. Peel had a plan to thread the
British. Corn is corn, okay? It's maize. That is the indigenous term, the Native American term for it. That's corn, okay? Grain is grain. It's grainy. Okay. God.
needle, but it had to stay a secret. He sent an agent to Boston on a mission to buy 100,000 pounds worth of maize or cornmeal. Peel's agents then started shipping it to Ireland on the quiet. His bet was this: since maize didn't grow in Britain and no British merchants traded in it, this wouldn't be a direct intervention in the market. But the shipments still had to be kept secret, or British merchants might freak out about the competition and withhold their shipments to Ireland. The plan wasn't to feed Ireland with cornmeal. It was that cheap cornmeal would keep food prices low. Maize would not be given away, but sold at cost to counties, and paid for by landlords who would fundraise through their own poor relief organizations. The government would then match those funds and deliver the cornmeal from regional food depots. Peel also instituted road building projects where people could earn a wage to buy the cornmeal. It would be revenue neutral. Ireland, he said, must feed Ireland. If that sounds like a convoluted bureaucratic nightmare to you, you are correct.
Yeah.
The idea of fundraising
Sounds
was
like
a
England.
particularly terrible one. It meant that the poorest counties got less food aid than the richer ones. Parish priests complained that no one in their county had anything to donate. If they could, they would have already bought food. Irish farmers ended up pawning their few possessions to buy cornmeal. Others had no choice but to sign up for the hard labor of working on the roads. There were logistical hurdles too. Irish infrastructure was dismal, with a minuscule railway network and roads that deteriorated outside major cities. Maize shipments had to navigate those rocky networks to reach rural areas. But even before that, the maize had to be ground into cornmeal, and Ireland only had 2 mills that could accomplish that. And even when people got the cornmeal, they had to learn to cook it properly or else it made them sick. Scurvy, previously unknown due to the potato's high vitamin C content, started cropping up.
Ooh.
So people who couldn't get the relief food went hungry, and people who could plunged deeper into poverty, keeping themselves fed. Some even subsisted on spoiled potatoes. There were food riots and a few high-profile attacks on wealthy citizens. In one county, 1,500 Irish farmers turned up, all armed, when a group of British troops arrived to enforce an eviction. But overall, there was no major risings and no mass death. People survived. Peel, however, would not, because his maize and work programs were not the end of his plans. Though a Tory, he'd come around to the free trade views of the liberal Whigs. He disliked the Corn Laws, which kept cheap American grain off the British market, artificially inflating bread prices, and saw in the Irish crisis an opportunity to push for repeal. Now, if it helped Ireland, so much the better. But that was secondary. He would use this famine as a cudgel to beat his opponents with. He took on the Corn Laws, decrying how high tariffs contributed to starvation in Ireland. And he argued that greed, as much as blight, was starving the Irish farmer. And this was explosive. In 1845, the Corn Laws conjured up the same emotional weight that surrounds issues like healthcare and fuel taxes today. Champions of the law predicted that repeal would collapse the agricultural sector, while the repeal camp cast images of a starving British public unable to afford bread. This move pushed Peel out as prime minister, but he was back 2 weeks later when the opposition failed to form a government. Long term, repealing the Corn Laws would prove good for Britain. Cheap food helped fuel the expansion of its industrial base and build its empire, but it did nothing to help Ireland. In fact, by tying famine relief to the Corn Laws, he'd thrown the Irish poor into a partisan crossfire. Now, members of the pro-Corn Law camp doubted there even was a famine in Ireland. They spun conspiracy theories that Peel had embellished reports of blight.
One of the things I was worried about, especially with this episode, that I was starting to feel early on here, was the way that they were kind of, one of the things that happens on, and is not a dig at them, right? It's just something that happens, and it's something that, like, I don't know, maybe like a false conception online that people have is like the idea of trying to be neutral when it comes to presenting history. There is no neutrality when it comes to presenting history. You can try and be neutral, but all you're going to do in that attempt is kind of miss the mark, and it's not going to come across as well. Right? Like if they had this video, like, it's so weird to explain, but like, are there things that the Irish maybe could have done themselves? Perhaps. But the potato famine itself is largely, and the mass amount of starvation and death that comes from the potato famine is due to English landowners within Ireland and the English government. And for a lot of this video, up until now, really, to me, it was kind of feeling like they were dancing around that and not outright saying that the English are causing problems to me. They were like mentioning it, but they weren't like going for the throat. For me, I am someone that believes don't hold back. Go for the fucking throat. You are here to make a point. You are here to detail, in this case, a very tragic event in human history. An awful event for the Irish in Irish history. Go for the fucking throat. It's like, if you have a belief, if you are someone that wholeheartedly believes, let's say, I personally do not believe that the English attempted a genocide here. However, if there is an Irish historian that wants to argue that it is a genocide, they're not going to dance around shit. They're going to go for the fucking throat, right? Or an Englishman trying to argue that it was not a genocide on the English part. The English, I don't know, tried to help. They are going to go for the throat. Like, there are certain things where riding the middle doesn't work, and it is an injustice to the real history. and I think I've had this issue with extra history before, where the way that they conveyed the information made it sound like, I can't remember the video, but I think it was something where it felt like they were again dancing around, maybe out of the idea of not wanting to offend a group of their audience, right? Because, English people are going to be defensive of, it's only normal to be defensive of your ancestry, of your people, if they are being accused of a genocide, or of doing misdeeds. It's only natural, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to defend them, so long as you're also willing to accept the fact that the English did do horrible things in history, as did the Americans, as did a lot of Western colonizing powers. But where was I going with this? But yeah, I don't know. It's just like when you're trying to ride that line, which for up until really right about now, it felt like Extra Credits was riding the line of both sides of the Irish and the English side here. It just felt like a disservice to Irish, and to the history of the potato famine. Maybe I could just be reading too far into it, but I don't know. It just tickled me wrong. It just felt wrong the way that they were conveying the history here. Because yeah, like the lawmakers of England and the English landowners are to blame for the potato famine. Like, the debate really, and they don't need to go into this, of the question of, is it a genocide or not? Was it purposeful by the English government? Is not a question I'm expecting them to tackle. But, and that's where disagreements, I think, can come from. But I believe it to be fact that it is the English landowners and English government are to blame, near undeniably fully to blame for the potato famine in Ireland, because of what they did and what they didn't do.
In order to galvanize the repeal effort. And this theory gained credence when news emerged that the
Tater debater becomes legislator deflator.
Scientific Commission had overestimated the 1845 crop loss. They had predicted an 80% mortality for the potato, but actually, the figure ended up being about half that. It was still a dire situation, sure, but not the agricultural apocalypse the scientists had sold Parliament. This ugly partisan warfare meant two things. First, an entrenched bloc in Parliament now saw famine relief as a partisan issue, tied to the Corn Laws. And second, it created an impression that reports of crop loss in Ireland were always exaggerated. But the truth boiled down to this. In the future, families would die with empty bellies in Ireland, while in London, politicians would dismiss reports of famine as alarmist. Peel won.
This, go for the throats of the politicians. Don't dance around the subject.
In the end. On June 29, 1846, as his cornmeal deliveries were finally in full swing, he crossed the aisle and voted with the opposition, repealing the Corn Laws once and for all. But he got to enjoy his victory for less than 24 hours, because the next day, both parties revolted and threw him out of power. The Whigs took over, high on their victory. And Peel's relief program, which had let the Irish poor barely scrape by through the first year of the crisis, came under the full control of a civil servant named Sir Charles Trevelyan.
And in regards to Peel, it seems like they're kind of insinuating it. The fact that, he kind of was just using the Irish potato famine as a means to really gain political power and stay in a position of political authority.
Trevelyan. His first act was to cancel the food shipments. After all, the task was done. Next year's crop was about to come in. But the 1846 crop was a total failure. And the bad times, the great hunger, were about to begin.
And that was the Irish potato famine, the Corn Laws, Extra History number 2 by Extra Credits. either I don't know. There's when it comes to a rough history like this, it's be hard to talk about, and I don't know. It just felt like for me that they were trying to dance around, dance on both sides of who is to blame here. And like they weren't fully going in to blame, you know, up until this last like minute here, that it was politics really that made the famine much like there still would have been a famine had the English government gotten their shit together and actually helped out, but it would have been a much less severe famine. We wouldn't see like the amount of Irish that die had the English actually helped out. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.